system or like a machine, there's this expectation of precision.
Right. Yeah, like engineering.
Exactly. You put a certain input into a machine and you know exactly what the output is going to be. I mean, think about it for a second. You fall off your bike, your arm swells up, you go to the hospital, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the screen, and the doctor just points at it and says, there it is, broken.
It's binary. It's totally visible.
Yeah.
You cast it, you wait 6 weeks, it heals.
Yeah.
We kind of love that kind of mechanics. I mean, we really want our societal problems to have that same clear, mechanical, step-by-step solution.
But then you step into the world of crime and how society actually responds to it, and suddenly that x-ray machine it's completely shattered. We're looking at a landscape that is incredibly murky.
Yeah.
Because when someone commits a serious wrong, society builds this massive, complex, multi-billion-dollar machinery to respond to it. We put the crime in one end, but what is actually supposed to come out the other side?
It is the absolute definition of muddy waters.
Yeah.
Because what we expect that machinery to do changes completely depending on, well, who you ask, when you ask them, and exactly how close they are to the harm that was actually caused. The goals we have for our justice system are often just entirely at war with each other.
Which is really the core friction we are pulling apart today. Welcome to the deep dive, by the way. If you're joining us, we know you're here because you want to get past the surface level noise and really understand the complex machinery of our world without the overwhelming info dump.
Right. We're trying to keep it clear.
Exactly. So our mission today, based on our source material, is to answer one fundamental question. When society responds to a serious crime, what exactly are we trying to achieve? Okay, let's unpack this. We have this whole menu of consequences, right? Imprisonment, which is just taking away someone's physical freedom.
Fines, taking their money.
Right, fines. Probation, community service, restrictions on liberty, and in some places, even execution. But those are just the actions. We really want to know the why. Are we punishing someone simply because they deserve to suffer? Are we doing it to, terrify the next person who might commit a crime? Are we trying to fix a broken human being? Or, are we doing it because the victim needs something specific to heal?
And the really difficult part is you just can't have all of them at once.
Yeah.
If you design a punishment purely to satisfy a victim's profound anger, well, it is very rarely going to rehabilitate the offender.
Right.
But if you focus 100% on rehabilitation, to a lot of people, that feels like you're just abandoning moral responsibility entirely. You have to make a choice. And today, we're looking at the 5 competing philosophies that drive those choices: revenge, retribution, deterrence, incapacitation, and rehabilitation or restoration.
And just to set the tone here, our goal today isn't to declare one system right or wrong or, take some political stance on justice.
Definitely not.
We're just impartially exploring the philosophical and practical gears inside this machine. So let's start at the absolute beginning. Before the courtrooms, before gavels, before complex legal codes, to really understand modern justice, we have to look at its oldest, most emotionally powerful ancestor, the primal urge.
Yeah, we have to talk about revenge.
I was reading up on the psychology of this, and the emotional logic of revenge is so deeply, just universally human. I mean, when violence happens, when someone causes profound harm to you or someone you love, you are left with this chaotic storm of emotions.
Grief, obviously. Fear.
Humiliation, too. But there's also this overwhelming, visceral sense that the moral order of your universe has just been completely shattered. Your brain is essentially flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. And the instinctual response to that shattered order is so direct. The wrongdoer caused pain, so now I need to make them feel that exact same pain.
There's actually a strong evolutionary basis for it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, in early human societies, if you didn't retaliate, you were seen as weak, which basically just invited more attacks. So retaliation was literally survival. You hit me, I hit you back harder so you don't ever do it again.
Wow, okay.
But the psychological reality of revenge in a modern context is incredibly destructive.
Yeah, there's an original analogy I was thinking about to kind of help visualize this. It's like, imagine a perfectly balanced scale, right? And someone comes along and drops a huge boulder on one side, representing the harm they caused. The scale smashes down. Revenge is like trying to rebalance that scale by just violently hurling rocks at the other side.
That's a great way to put it.
I mean, it feels like action. It feels like you're doing something. But really, it's just messy and chaotic, and eventually the whole scale just breaks. You know that old saying, Revenge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Right, yeah.
You hold on to this toxic, consuming anger, thinking that if you just unleash enough of it onto the person who hurt you, you'll be cured. You'll feel better. Like the person you lost will somehow matter more.
What's fascinating here is that the mechanism of revenge is inherently flawed from the very beginning, because pain isn't a currency.
Wait, break that down for me. What do you mean pain isn't a currency?
Well, think about a standard financial transaction. If I steal $100 from you, and the court forces me to give you $100 back, your bank account is whole again, right?
Right. The math works out.
Exactly, the math works. But emotional and physical harm just doesn't work that way. If someone takes a life or causes this permanent life-altering trauma and you inflict unimaginable suffering onto the perpetrator in return, the victim's original pain doesn't actually decrease.
No.
The trauma isn't erased. The loved one doesn't walk back through the door.
You're really just adding a second pile of suffering to the world.
Precisely. And this highlights the really critical distinction between pure revenge and what we call institutional punishment. You see, revenge is intensely personal. It takes sides. And most dangerously, it is potentially unlimited. It has no natural stopping point.
Because the anger is bottomless.
Exactly. If you are operating on pure revenge, you might not stop when those scales are balanced. You might just keep inflicting pain until the other person is completely and utterly destroyed. I mean, this is literally how multi-generational blood feuds start.
So the state has to step in to act as a buffer. Society creates legal punishment to be the exact opposite of revenge. It's supposed to be, public, impartial, proportionate. Like the judge isn't supposed to hate the defendant.
Right.
The judge is just applying the rules of the machinery.
Ideally, yes. That is the ideal. But here is where the friction really starts to show. Even though the state wears this sterile mask of impartiality, the emotional logic of revenge constantly masquerades as legal language in our public discourse.
Oh, absolutely.
Just listen to talk radio or political debates after a really horrific crime. When people demand these incredibly harsh, agonizing sentences, they are very rarely citing peer-reviewed data showing that a 40-year sentence protects society better than a 20-year sentence.
No. They say things like, let them rot, or throw away the key.
Exactly. Underneath the legal jargon, the public demand is often just a sanitized version of revenge. The underlying belief is that producing deliberate suffering somehow makes society more just. But if a society builds its entire justice system on that foundation of revenge, it inevitably breeds cruelty. It leads to excessive sentences and the complete dehumanization of offenders. It really begs the question, does producing deliberate suffering make society more just or just more organized in its cruelty?
Okay, I hear that, but let's just be real for a second. If someone purposefully hurts someone I love, I don't care about their humanity in that moment. I really don't. I want them to suffer. And that is a very real, incredibly valid human emotion.
It is. It's completely understandable.
So how did society take that incredibly raw, chaotic emotion and try to civilize it? Because, we clearly don't just let people duel in the streets with pistols anymore.
No, we don't. And that leads us to the second philosophy. They tried to wrangle that raw emotion into something more disciplined, which is retribution. And this is where we shift from pure emotional rage to the idea of the moral ledger.
The moral ledger, okay.
Yeah. Retribution is a word that gets thrown around a lot as just a fancy synonym for revenge. But philosophically, they are entirely different animals. Retribution introduces this concept of desert, as in what someone actually deserves.
Okay, so it's the idea that people who knowingly commit serious wrongs deserve proportionate punishment.
The key word there is knowingly. Retribution isn't driven by hatred at all. It's driven by moral responsibility and acknowledging the dignity of the victim. It actually respects the offender's agency.
How so?
It says to the offender, you are a rational human being. You made a conscious choice to violate someone else's rights. And by making that choice, you chose to accept the consequences.
Okay, this reminds me of this brilliant thought experiment I came across while we were prepping for this deep dive. It's from the text, and it's called The Meaningless Moral System. I want you, the listener, to imagine two people. Let's call them Person A and Person B.
Okay, let's hear it.
So Person A works really hard. They pay their taxes. They stop at red lights. They don't steal, even when they are really struggling financially. They actively suppress their selfish impulses. They play by the rules. Basically, they carry the heavy burden of civilization on their shoulders every single day.
And it is a burden, right? Restraint is difficult.
It is incredibly difficult. Now imagine person B. Let's make person B this extremely wealthy executive who runs a massive fraud scheme. They deliberately wipe out the pension funds of thousands of working class people purely for their own luxury. They're buying yachts while their victims are literally losing their homes.
A clear, calculated violation.
Exactly. Now, what happens if person B is caught, but the justice system just decides, well, punishing them won't bring the money back. It's economically inefficient to put them in prison, so we're just going to let it slide.
Wow.
Right? How does person A, the person working 2 jobs and paying their taxes, feel about that?
Person A rightfully feels that the entire moral fabric of society is a complete sham. I mean, why should anyone carry the burden of following the rules if there is absolutely no difference in outcome between those who follow them and those who flagrantly break them?
Exactly. Retribution actually validates person A. It says that wrongdoing inherently demands a response to rebalance that moral ledger. Leaving a serious wrong unpunished isn't just, inefficient. It is actively unjust. It diminishes the value of the victims who were harmed.
The philosopher Immanuel Kant was a huge proponent of this.
Oh, yeah.
He basically argued that even if a society was going to dissolve tomorrow and scatter to the winds, they still have a strict moral obligation to execute the last murderer in their prison today, just to ensure that justice is perfectly balanced before the world ends.
Okay, wait, I have a massive problem with that. I really have to push back here.
Go for it.
Kant's philosophy sounds incredibly pristine if you're in an 18th century university lecture hall. But how on earth do you actually mathematically measure what someone deserves in the real world? What is the exchange rate for human suffering?
That is the exact breaking point of retribution. You hit the nail on the head. It demands proportionality, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But translating that into a modern, practical legal system is just incredibly messy.
Right, because if you commit fraud, does that equal, 3 years in a concrete cell? Is it 5 years? Does it mean you lose your right to vote forever? How did we ever arrive at the idea that months and years in a cage is this universal currency for paying off moral debt?
Well, we don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah.
But the deeper problem with measuring what someone deserves isn't just about a punishment side of the equation. It's about assessing the free will of the offender in the first place.
Okay, explain that.
You set up the example of person B earlier, the wealthy executive. Their free will is quite clear. They had every advantage in life, and they simply chose greed. But what if person B is 19 years old? What if they were born into deep generational poverty? What if they suffered severe physical abuse as a toddler, which we know medically permanently alters the development of the prefrontal cortex?
Or, what if they have a severe, completely untreated mental illness?
Exactly. Retribution hinges entirely on the idea of a completely free, rational choice. But does anyone actually freely choose crime under perfectly equal conditions? If that 19-year-old with brain trauma and zero social support commits a violent robbery, and the wealthy executive commits massive fraud, is their moral responsibility truly equal? Does the ledger account for the zip code you were born in or the trauma you experienced?
It makes the whole concept of a perfectly balanced moral ledger look like an illusion, honestly. It just assumes we all start at the exact same starting line.
Which we clearly do not. And this is why, over time, society realized that retribution alone just isn't enough. It fails to give us a practical blueprint for how to actually punish, or how severe it should be. And crucially, it is entirely backward-looking.
Meaning it only cares about the past.
Yes, it only looks at the crime that has already happened. It doesn't offer a single solution for the future. And if your society is plagued by a rising crime rate, just looking backward doesn't make the streets any safer tomorrow.
Which brings us to the great pivot. If we realize we can't perfectly measure past moral debt, maybe the whole point of punishment shouldn't be about the past at all. Maybe the machinery shouldn't be a ledger. Maybe it should be a tool for social engineering. And that brings us to the third philosophy, deterrence.
Right. Deterrence is all about the future. It is fundamentally about prevention. The core logic is basic human psychology, really. People avoid pain. If they know that committing a crime will bring severe, unavoidable consequences, they just won't do it.
And deterrence basically splits into 2 distinct channels, right?
It does.
You have individual deterrence, which is focused strictly on the specific person sitting in the courtroom. You punish them so that they personally say, wow, I never ever want to experience that again, I'm going straight. But then you have general deterrence, which is where things get philosophically explosive.
General deterrence is all about the audience. It is punishing one person to send a psychological shockwave through the rest of the population.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When I started visualizing this machinery, it honestly gave me chills. Because under general deterrence, we are literally turning human beings into warning labels for the rest of society.
Warning labels. Elaborate on how you see that.
Okay, think about those graphic, terrifying images they print on cigarette cartons in some countries. Decaying teeth, diseased lungs. The state essentially takes a person who has committed a crime, strips them of their freedom, maybe hands down an outrageously long sentence, and holds them up as a giant flashing billboard that says, "Do not do this, or we will destroy your life too."
That is exactly what it is. And you've just highlighted the massive moral and ethical dilemma at the heart of general deterrence. You are fundamentally using a human being as a tool, a means to an end.
Yeah.
Let's look at how this plays out in an actual courtroom. Imagine a judge is sentencing a young man for stealing cars. Under pure retribution, based purely on what that specific theft deserves, maybe the sentence should be, say, 1 year. But the judge looks at the news. Car thefts are up 400% in the city. The mayor is furious. The public is terrified.
So the judge wants to send a message.
Exactly. The judge decides to make an example of this young man. He sentences him to 10 years.
So wait, he's basically serving 1 year for the cars he actually stole, and 9 years to manage the behavior of thousands of strangers he has never even met?
Precisely. His extra suffering is socially useful. It might actually work to scare other potential thieves. But morally, the state is inflicting massive pain on him for crimes he did not commit, purely to optimize social behavior through fear. It crosses a major ethical line.
It's treating justice like a lever you pull to manipulate a population. And here is where the data really throws a wrench into the machine. We've been talking about deterrence as if it's this precise mathematical equation. But deterrence is built on a deeply flawed assumption. It assumes the calculating criminal.
Ah, yes. The idea that someone sits down at their kitchen table with a spreadsheet, carefully weighing the potential rewards of a crime against the statutory maximum penalties.
Exactly. Like, armed robbery carries a 15-year sentence, but the yield is $10,000. Let me run a quick cost-benefit analysis before I grab my ski mask. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It really is.
For white-collar crimes, sure. Insider trading, corporate embezzlement, those people absolutely calculate the odds of getting caught. But violent crime, street crime, it just doesn't work that way.
The psychological realities completely dismantle the theory. Let's look at the brain chemistry, like we talked about earlier. When is a violent crime usually committed? Under extreme, blinding anger. A bar fight that escalates. Domestic violence? The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for long-term planning and understanding consequences, is essentially hijacked by the amygdala. They are not thinking about the penal code in that moment.
Or look at addiction. If someone is experiencing severe opioid withdrawal, their brain is screaming at them that they need the substance to literally survive. They aren't calculating whether the penalty for breaking into a pharmacy is 5 years or 20 years. They just need the withdrawal to stop immediately.
Then you have peer pressure, panic, mental instability, and perhaps the most common delusion of all, the arrogant belief that they simply won't get caught.
Right. If you don't think you're going to get caught, it literally doesn't matter if the penalty is a $50,000 fine or being launched into the sun. You don't think it applies to you.
And this brings us to a really fascinating, purely objective finding from the sociological research on this. When policymakers want to act tough on crime, they usually increase the severity of the punishment. They take a 10-year sentence and make it 20. But the data strongly suggests that increasing severity has almost zero deterrent effect.
Wait, really? So what actually works then?
Speed and certainty.
Speed and certainty. Okay.
Think about it like a hot stove. If you touch a hot stove, you are burned instantly. You learn immediately not to touch it again. But our justice system doesn't work like a hot stove at all. It takes months, sometimes years, to go to trial. If a potential offender knows there's a 90% chance they will be caught and face a consequence tomorrow, that is a massive deterrent.
But if they know there is a 10% chance they will be caught and face a massive consequence 3 years from now,
The human brain discounts that risk almost entirely. It just doesn't register as a real threat.
which leaves society in a really terrifying bind. If retribution is impossible to measure fairly, and deterrence fails against the reality of human panic and addiction, what do you do with the people who remain incredibly dangerous? What do you do when the warning label just doesn't work?
You have to completely abandon the focus on the offender's moral soul, and you abandon the idea of sending messages to the public. You shrink the focus down to one singular, brutally pragmatic goal: protecting the potential victims.
And this brings us to the fourth philosophy, incapacitation. I like to call this the Minority Report dilemma.
That's the science fiction movie, right? Where they arrest people before they even commit crimes.
Yes. In the movie, they have these psychics who can see the future, and police arrest people for pre-crime. They kick your door down and throw you in a cell because you were going to commit a murder on Tuesday. It sounds crazy, but incapacitation edges dangerously close to that exact same logic.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the physical mechanics of incapacitation are incredibly straightforward. You take a dangerous person and you physically remove them from the environment where they can cause harm. You put them behind a locked door. The stated goal here isn't necessarily to make them suffer. It's not about making them feel guilty. It's literally just a quarantine.
Right. If a tiger is walking through the town square, you don't lock it up to teach it a moral lesson about eating people. You lock it up so it simply stops eating people.
Exactly. And let's be clear, society has a fundamental obligation to do this. If someone has a proven, repeated history of severe violence, the state's first duty is to ensure the safety of its citizens.
Absolutely.
But the mechanism of how we decide who gets incapacitated and for how long is fraught with peril. Because you are no longer punishing them for what they did. You are confining them for what you predict they might do.
Preventive punishment. Which brings us right back to the Minority Report thing. How do we actually predict the future without sci-fi psychics?
Well, we use risk assessment tools, algorithms. Parole boards look at a prisoner and try to calculate the statistical probability that they will reoffend if released. And this is where we have to look objectively at how these tools actually function. Because predicting human behavior is notoriously inaccurate.
Okay, but explain me how an algorithm could be flawed in this context. Isn't a computer program perfectly neutral? It's just numbers, right?
A computer program is only as neutral as the data set into it. Let's look at the actual variables these algorithms use to predict future crime. They don't just look at the crime the person committed, they look at proxy variables.
Proxy variables like what?
They might look at a person's employment history, their level of education, the frequency of police contact in their home zip code, whether they grew up in a single-parent household.
Oh, wow. Wait, so if I live in a heavily over-policed neighborhood and I grew up poor, the algorithm views me as a higher mathematical risk for future crime than, say, a rich kid from the suburbs who committed the exact same offense.
Yes. The factual reality of these systems, which our source text explicitly mentions, is that they can inadvertently reproduce historical inequalities regarding class and race. If a parole board denies release to an individual, not because of their behavior in prison, but because their demographic data generates a high risk score, incapacitation ceases to be just about public safety. It risks becoming a mechanism that punishes people indefinitely for the circumstances of their birth.
You are literally locking someone in a cage because of a statistical correlation. That completely erases the concept of a fair trial. It erases due process.
And fundamentally, it erases the most important hope of humanity, the belief that people have the capacity to change. If you lock someone away purely on a prediction of their future, you are declaring them permanently defective.
And that pivot, the belief that human beings are capable of profound change, takes us out of the realm of punishment as a weapon or a quarantine. It flips the entire machinery upside down and brings us to the fifth philosophy, rehabilitation.
This is a radical shift in the central question. Every other philosophy we've discussed so far asks, how much should this person suffer? Or how do we stop them? Rehabilitation looks at the offender and asks, what does this person need? What do they need in order to stop causing harm and successfully return to society? And when I look at the mechanics of rehabilitation from our sources, it's not just a vague concept of, being nice to criminals.
Yeah.
It involves highly technical, specialized interventions.
Give me an example of the mechanics. How does it actually work on the ground?
Well, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is a massive one. We talked earlier about how the prefrontal cortex gets hijacked by anger or impulse. CBT programs in prisons actually work to rewire those neural pathways.
All right.
They teach offenders to identify the specific physiological triggers that lead to their violent outbursts and build mental speed bumps so they can pause before acting. Add to that deep addiction care, where you are treating the chemical dependency that drives the theft. There's vocational training teaching them actual skills so they don't have to return to the underground economy. The moral strength of this approach is undeniable. It refuses to reduce a complex human being to the worst 15 minutes of their life. It holds them accountable, but it doesn't view them as just a disposable piece of garbage.
But even if someone listening doesn't care about the moral argument, even if they think, offenders deserve to be treated terribly. There is a brutally pragmatic, undeniable fact that our research highlights. The vast, overwhelming majority of prisoners will eventually be released.
Something like 95% of them.
Exactly. They are coming back. They are going to be standing behind you in line at the grocery store. They are going to be sitting next to you on the bus. They might be dating your sibling. If a traditional, hyper-punitive prison environment subjects them to daily violence, strips them of their dignity, subjects them to solitary confinement, which literally causes psychosis, and releases them with zero job skills and a criminal record, what has society actually accomplished?
We have basically spent millions of taxpayer dollars to run an anger factory. We take damaged people, damage them further, and then release them directly into our own neighborhoods. From a purely logical standpoint, the pursuit of harsh punishment in that scenario actively makes society much more dangerous. Rehabilitation serves both human dignity and concrete public protection.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
I can hear people yelling at their speakers right now.
Go ahead.
If a person commits a horrific, premeditated, violent crime against my family, and they are sent to a facility where they get free therapy, free college courses, job training, and a peaceful environment to work on their inner trauma, while my family is left drowning in medical bills, funeral costs, and lifelong PTSD, does that not feel like justice has been entirely replaced by medical treatment?
It is the most potent critique of rehabilitation, and it cannot be ignored. The reality is crime is not always just a symptom of sickness, trauma, or poverty. Sometimes it involves deliberate, calculated cruelty. It involves the exploitation of the weak.
Yeah, if you treat a calculated white-collar fraudster or a violent sociopath as just a patient who needs curing, it feels deeply offensive to the victim. It feels like the state is completely minimizing the moral weight of the evil that was done to them.
Because if society just says, oh, you did a terrible thing, let's get you into a nice classroom, it fails to express the collective moral outrage that society feels. It fails to say what you did was unequivocally wrong.
And as we hit this point, I realize there is a massive gaping hole in almost everything we've discussed so far. Whether we are debating retribution, deterrence, incapacitation, or rehabilitation, the entire conversation has been completely obsessed with the offender. How do we punish them? How do we fix them? How do we use them?
We have entirely left out the most important person in the room.
The victim, the actual human being whose life was destroyed. So what does this all mean for them?
This is the massive blind spot of modern Western justice. And it leads us to the final paradigm shift: restorative justice.
I was looking at how our current court system operates, and it is fascinatingly alienating. When a crime is committed, say an assault, the legal case isn't John Doe versus the guy who hit him. The case is the state versus the defendant. The state literally steps in and steals the conflict from the victim.
Right. The logic is that a crime is a violation of the state's laws, so the state is the injured party. The victim is demoted to a mere piece of evidence. They are put on the witness stand to establish facts, but the system doesn't actually care about their emotional healing.
And what does that leave the victim with? They are sitting in the back of the courtroom. They watch lawyers argue about legal technicalities. They watch the offender get shipped off to a facility. They never get to ask, why did you choose my house? Were you watching me? Do you feel any remorse for ruining my life? They get zero emotional closure and often zero financial repair for the destruction.
Restorative justice attempts to radically shift the foundational questions. Traditional justice asks, what law was broken, who broke it, and how do we punish them? Restorative justice asks, who was harmed, what do they need to heal, and whose obligation is it to repair that harm?
It places the harm itself, rather than the rule breaking, at the center of the universe. What does this look like in practice, though? How do you engineer closure?
The mechanics are deeply personal. It involves restitution, actually making the offender work to pay back the financial damage. It involves community service directly related to the harm. But the most powerful tool is mediated dialogue, bringing the victim and the offender face-to-face in a secure, intensely facilitated environment.
I read case studies on these mediations, and the neurobiology of what happens in those rooms is astounding. When a victim is traumatized, their brain often turns the offender into a faceless, omnipotent monster. They check the locks 10 times a night. But when they sit across from them and look them in the eye and force the offender to listen to exactly how they destroyed their life, and when the offender genuinely apologizes and takes accountability, it can actually short-circuit the trauma loop in the victim's brain.
They regain their power. The monster shrinks back into a flawed, pathetic human being. And for the offender, it strips away all their rationalizations. In a courtroom, a defense attorney speaks for them, minimizing their guilt. In a restorative circle, they have to look a grieving mother in the eye and own what they did.
Mhm.
That is often far more agonizing and far more transformative than sitting silently in a prison cell for 5 years.
It addresses what victims actually need: safety, the truth, compensation, and the public acknowledgement that their suffering mattered. A 20-year prison sentence doesn't pay a victim's rent. It doesn't answer their lingering nightmares. We've been assuming this whole time that harsher punishment automatically equals greater justice for the victim, but a victim-centered system shatters that assumption entirely.
However, we must be intellectually honest about the limits here. Restorative justice is not a magic wand. It is incredibly delicate.
Right. It doesn't work if the offender is a psychopath who feels no empathy. They will just manipulate the mediation and re-traumatize the victim.
It also poses massive risks where there are deep, unequal power dynamics. Things of domestic abuse or human trafficking. Putting a victim in a room with their abuser can be incredibly dangerous. And the most critical rule of all, restorative justice must be entirely voluntary. The state cannot force a victim to forgive or pressure them into a mediation just to save court costs.
Absolutely. So we have finally put all the tools on the table. We've unpacked retribution, deterrence, incapacitation, rehabilitation, and restoration. 5 completely distinct, incredibly powerful ways of looking at why we punish. The ultimate challenge for a civilization is, how do you build a machine that balances them when their gears are constantly grinding against each other?
This raises an important question. How do you reconcile the fact that locking someone up for 30 years satisfies retribution, but entirely destroys their chances of rehabilitation? Or how do you justify a public punishment for deterrence when it inflicts more suffering than retribution allows?
The conclusion we arrive at, based on all the sources, is that there is no unified theory of everything for justice. You can't just pick one philosophy and apply it to every single crime. You have to tailor the machinery to the specific context of the harm.
You modulate the response. If you have a minor nonviolent crime like vandalism or minor theft, the primary engine should be restoration, restitution, community service, making the victim whole.
If you are dealing with addiction-related offenses, you shift the gears heavily toward rehabilitation. You recognize the chemical reality of the brain and provide treatment because punishing a disease is practically useless.
If you're dealing with white-collar financial crimes, the calculating executives, you utilize deterrence and restoration. Massive, crushing fines, repayment to victims, and permanent disqualification from their professions. You alter their cost-benefit analysis.
And for violent repeat offenses where the individual shows no capacity for change, the system leans inevitably toward incapacitation. You lock the door to protect the public. But for young offenders, you always keep the dial turned toward rehabilitation, recognizing that their brains are still developing and their potential is vast.
A truly just system demands a staggering level of nuance. It abandons the simple, comforting, binary X-ray machine. Instead of asking the primal, easy question, how severely can we make this person suffer, it asks a vastly more difficult compound question. What response is proportionate to this offense, actively protects society, centers the victim's needs, and offers the greatest realistic possibility of reducing future harm?
It is a machine that requires constant maintenance, constant self-reflection, and a refusal to give in to our easiest, darkest instincts. As we pull all of these threads together, we see that punishment is a deeply complex mirror of who we are as a species. It shouldn't be about pure revenge. It shouldn't be about producing suffering just for the sake of adding more pain to the world. A just society has to walk a razor-thin tightrope. We have to take wrongdoing incredibly seriously without letting that seriousness rot into cruelty. We must protect victims and validate their trauma without treating the people who broke the rules as permanently less than human.
It's a balance we are still very much struggling to find.
It is. And as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought. A hypothetical scenario to test your own internal machinery. Imagine it is 50 years in the future. Science has invented a flawless, completely painless, overnight medical procedure. If someone commits a horrific crime, society gives them this procedure. It perfectly and instantly rehabilitates them. It rewires the brain, guaranteeing with absolute 100% certainty that they will never, ever offend again. They are completely cured.
Wow. Okay.
Furthermore, let's imagine this future society also possesses a mechanism that perfectly compensates the victim. It restores their wealth, heals their physical wounds, and wipes away their trauma, making them entirely whole again.
Yep.
If that future existed, If we could instantly extinguish all need for deterrence because no one will reoffend, if we could extinguish all need for incapacitation because they are no longer dangerous, and all need for traditional rehabilitation because they are instantly cured.
A perfect fix.
Right. Would you, or would society, still demand that the offender be locked in a concrete cell just to satisfy our primal retributive urge for them to suffer? Would you still feel that justice hasn't been done unless they felt pain?
Mm,
And whatever your answer is, what does that tell you about the gears turning inside your own head?
that is a lot to think about.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the machinery, and we'll catch you next time.